Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over at twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it's also uploaded as a YouTube video under the YouTube channel of Zenitsu, as well as going up on various podcasting platforms that we are available on, including Spotify and iHeartRadio. And as far as what we're going to be talking about today, I'm with my co-host Teddy, and we're going to be discussing the direction of mechanics and keywords in the game, and just a general conversation about mechanical identities and where they currently are in the Digimon card game. So before we get into that topic, let's start with your average meta update. So we have 3 events worth of data to look at, and I'm just going to preface this right now. The meta really didn't shift a whole lot. So we're just probably going to breeze through them just because the meta, again, didn't really change a whole lot. So, oops, wrong tab. Starting off with the... Hold up. No, I grabbed the wrong tab again. Okay. Starting off with the Latin American Ultimate Cup, we can see that the deck that won was an All-Force deck. Second place was Machine German. Third place was All-Force. Fourth place was Blue Flare. Fifth place was Bloom Lord. Sixth place was All-Force. 7th place was Machine German, 8th was a BL's, 9th was a BL's, 10th was War Greymon. At this point, I believe that literally anytime you see War Greymon or Black War Greymon, they are including a red base and a Ragnar Lordmon. That just is the go-to for the format.
Yeah, I think that'll just be the way it is for now until someone finds something better. But I think it's just because of Ultimate Cup format. It's just the best level 7 to run. The deck. I think it's actually the only level 7 they can run, to be fair.
No, they could run
Gallantmon, I guess.
They could run Gallantmon and they could run Bond of Bravery, but like the thing is, you already have a Digimon that's very hard to kill, and you just get a second one out, and then you just DNA, and then the game is over.
Yeah, by that point, you've probably gotten them down to 3-2 security, less, and then you just auto-win, basically. So I completely understand why that's the case.
A lot of them are also running Dorbikmon, so that way they can just use all of the Digimon that they have just been sitting on in their hand, and they're just like, okay, I got my 1 Mega out. Here's a Mega that costs 3. Let me not pass turn because Memory Fixing Tamer, DNA, and then just auto-win. So, like, it's just the byproduct of the format. But 11th place is All-Force, 12th is Yellow Hybrids, 13th is Machine German, 14th is Bloom Lord, 15th is Bloom Lord, and 16th is Yellow Hybrid. So we could see that pretty much the same decks as the last time we talked about the meta are still winning. There's really nothing there's nothing shaking the meta. The meta is just what it is, and I'll get over into the hard datas at the bigger picture after just briefly looking at the other events. So nothing crazy happens there. Top Cut was another Ultimate Cup that happened in the past week or two. And top 16 breakdown is Machine German, followed by Machine German, followed by Beelzemon, Bloom Lord, Beelzemon, Dorpic OTK, All Force, Machine German, Beelzemon, Black War Greymon, Machine German, Yellow Hybrid, Machine German, D-Reaper. So D-Reaper was the only one that really broke into the meta that time around, but everything else is literally the same that we've been seeing. Dorbic is another interesting one. I know we kind of talked about it last time when we knew that Mario, kudos to him, was on Dorbikmon, but we saw also in the finals how bad of a matchup that could be when you're faced against something like Machine Dramon that's actually more meta competitive and viable. I don't know what Mario's matchups were, but sometimes you can get lucky with OTK-esque decks or decks that have a high enough damage output to be able to, and you dodge all of your bad matchups, to just be able to squeeze out a top 16. Mario, as a player, no shade on him. I know he generally plays these like hyper aggressive OTK-esque decks. That's just a thing that I noticed he did, and I don't blame him for that because the game really rewards you for wanting to do that. Decks with high damage are very good. Shocker.
Yeah. The super high roll decks that just win the game automatically. I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't want to play them, just because sometimes just coming out and winning turn 2, like sometimes that's just enough. Like your opponent can't do anything turn 2 or 3 when you just kill them instantly.
And the interesting thing about like Dorbikmon specifically, like because you know you don't have the unsuspend, you're not really punished for just hard slamming your Dorbikmon and then just swinging for the whatever amount of checks that you have, because if it's early enough in the game, they just actually don't have a response.
Most decks can't just instantly be like, well, okay, I can just deal with it without expending a massive amount of memory.
But the last event, which is the most recent event, is the Play TCG's Ultimate Cup. And the winner of that one was a Bloomlord. So it's nice to see that different decks are getting in first. It's not all just the same deck getting in first. But as you can see, that the majority of the decks are still doing exactly the same. So you have Bloomlord taking it. You have Beelzemon X, Machine Dramon, Beelzemon X, Red Hybrids, Wargreymon, Machine Dramon, Red Hybrids, Beelzemon, Wargreymon, Beelzemon, Bloomlord, Machine Dramon, Beelzemon, Machine Dramon. And then I think there was like one other. I might have misclicked and I didn't. No, that was...
Wargrey, normal. Yeah, I think that's literally it. Yep.
I thought there was one other event that I might have missed the data for. That was Cores. Yeah.
Yeah, Core.
So Core is the only one where like interesting stuff did happen. And it's not really like super hyper interesting. There was 2 new decks added to like make it and break it into top 16. Again, I think like with Mario and his his Dorpic run, some decks, if they don't see bad matchups, they can still get into top 16s. So out of Core TCG was the most current one. I lied. I forgot to hit refresh. Shame on me. But Beelzemon did end up winning that one. Beelzemon also came in second, followed by Red Hybrid, Bloomlord, Ulforce, Machine Dramon, Bloomlord, Beelzemon, Alphamon. That was one of the big upsets. Then we have Beelzemon, Bloomlord, Mervamon, and then Machine Dramon, Black Wargreymon. Mario was on that. Looks like he learned his lesson not to play into Machine Dramon with, and I think that Black Wargreymon has a way better matchup into Machine Dramon. And he's still using, he's using the Ragnarlord package, like everyone is doing, to basically just steal wins out of nowhere. So it's totally within Mario's wheelhouse to do that type of a thing. I know he's also played, like, Bloomlord as well. Again, another, like, hey, let me just do insane levels of damage and have this, like, big wombo combo turn. But as far as the new decks, if you want to take a look at Alphamon and Mervamon, we could kind of go over those a little bit. I'm not, like... Alphamon less so than Mervamon, because Mervamon's a little bit more interesting. Alphamon is just Alphamon, from what I saw.
Yeah, I mean, you can only use the one Doru. He's just, instead of leaning on he said Ryumon, he's going 4 Grademon, which I think is correct. More consistency. Okay, yeah, I mean, this looks pretty standard.
I mean it is just...
maybe might be the only thing that's, like, but like that's normal. I think this is still something that they used back then too.
They shifted more towards it just because they lost the extra security attack from the Doru Gray, so they needed something to make it up, and the rookie slot was the easiest slot that they could use to make it up. And the fact that it also could passively give piercing still matters.
Yeah, it's not a bad card in this deck, at least. It's pretty solid.
No, but like I can't say like, oh, there's something insanely crazy about this deck that made it win. It was just like, no, this just looks like an alpha deck.
This is as generic probably as it gets. Maybe the only thing that might be a little bit is the lack of removal, like just using ultimate flare like only one, but like other than that, I mean it's pretty standard.
I mean, Digivolve can get kind of annoying, and then there is a little bit of removal. Oh wait, no, there is no removal on the level 5s. I lied. Yeah, it's mostly just Digivolve from Alphamon.
Isn't well, I guess Grademon technically, but that's like a 5 play cost or less. That's like minuscule at best.
Yeah, you try to Digivolve into grade range.
Yeah, that's basically it. So it's not that great. And I mean, I guess Alphamon, of course, or you can is removal as well. But other than that, I mean, he's just said, screw it. I'm just going to go full consistency with the black memory boost, which makes sense. Since they have less Doru Grays, they want to see that as soon as possible. I like that he's not running, I guess, any of the Doru Gray X. I think that's correct. Now, at least, just because you have less Doru. Once we get the new Doru coming later, I think you switch back to Doru Gray and Doru Gray X. But that's later down the line. Not worried about that now. This is just a solid list.
Yeah. And then the Merva list is like actually kind of interesting / not interesting. Like I've built Purple Rush before on my YouTube channel. I knew it was a deck. I knew it existed. The fact that somebody actually like played it and adapted Mervamon inside of it was the interesting part, and the fact that they did find some success is like, oh yeah, stupid dumb low to the ground aggro, and then just have enough memory gain with all of the different memory boosts to be able to hard play Mervamon, not pass turn, and then just swing out for crazy damage. Like, who knew Rush could be good? Shocker.
Yeah, I like this list. This list is nice. It's actually pretty interesting. There's quite a bit.
There's a couple of things that like I question. So like I question the Imp X. Like I get you're mostly using it for the inheritable to mill. But the only other like evil that the deck is running is literally the Devimon that has retaliation, which you're using to give Rush because of Mervamon and how she works.
I think it's more so. I think it's just literally for the inheritable.
I think it is too.
And then maybe, I mean, maybe for trashing an option, but like, why would you? It doesn't really matter. None of these options will trigger. Besides, no, none of them trigger, so it doesn't matter. I think that's literally the only reason. They just were trying to find another slot, and this actually doesn't hurt the deck.
Yeah, so my iteration, I do remember it fondly. I was just using revive options to just revive my rushers for like 4 or less, and this is just trying to passively gain enough memory in a single turn to Merva and accomplish the same type of thing.
So yeah, I do like that they went with like the mill options like Deathslinger, Rivals, and things like that. I do like that they went this route instead of just going with the normal generic draw mill like normal like that. It's still, but the thing I find weird is I guess because Deathslinger is just good removal. Same with Roaring Shots, but like you're not realistically going to be able to trigger these like Rivals Barrage and these things very often. Like you only really trigger from what memory, their miss memory boost, and then the inheritable, because you can't do it from the draw triggers. So there's nothing else that just mills outright.
Doberman on delete, but yeah, like they're trying to run really cute mills, and I don't blame them. Obviously, they found success. But that deck more specifically compared to anything else we saw for Ultimate Cup is probably the biggest example of an outlier that I have ever seen.
This is probably just pure pilot. Like, he just did really well. He piloted against the right decks. He probably dodged a lot of the right matchups. And he just played very well. Like, this is 100% probably the case here.
Yeah. But as far
Just
as looking at the big picture, now that we've kind of talked about like the last four events really briefly, what was the thing that we noticed is obviously we're seeing the same four decks top in quite a large number compared to everything else. So I've already done this before last time, and Machine Dramon is still the number one deck. Beelzemon is still the number two deck. Bloomlord is still the number 3 deck, and Ulforce is still the number 4 deck. Like, the percentage in which they are being represented in top 16 is shifting, like, maybe at most 3%. But, like, this just is the meta. That like, if you're going into an event, expect to see those 4 decks, and expect to see those 4 decks in top 16, just because that just is how it is. That, like, we don't have anything that's like crazy upshaking the entirety of the meta. This is just the foundation that was laid on, and we're just building upon it and tweaking the percentages. As far as like some of the other big picture things to look at, Greymon based decks using red are adopting Ragnarlord as their big win condition, and then red hybrids is like tied for them, like always. So their representation is literally staying the same. So again, like, that's number 5 and 6 respectively, is just red based Greymon decks and hybrid decks, red hybrid. And then I would literally say, based on like everything else that we saw, there was still a small handful of decks that did just get lucky. Like, there's a lot of pilot to it, so it's not necessarily 100% luck. I'm just labeling it as they got lucky, because we've seen some of these decks hit really bad matchups and then just do absolutely nothing. So, like, matchup is part of it. Knowing how to play against and around the matchup is also part of it. And, like, obviously making sure your deck is consistent and on point is part of it. Like, there's still a lot of luck to it, which is why I just lumped it as they just got lucky.
And you could say that might not be the case, but I mean, we can just look at the data and see that just like there isn't much of these other decks getting up there. So it's like it's a bit of luck. It's probably a good amount of luck, a good amount of pilot skill, and a good mixture of those two things, because like it's clear that these decks, these top 4 decks in Ultimate Cup format specifically, are your meta decks. These are the decks you will be seeing. If your deck cannot compete against these decks, you will not have a good time. Simple as that. Not being negative or anything like that. It's just, that's just how it is, and there's nothing really wrong with that. But you gotta be realistic when it comes to these things.
And that's not saying other decks can't compete. Obviously, Digimon has a lot of playable decks, but whether they're tournament playable or competitive, that is a completely different story. And, like, BT12 / what we're going to be expecting out of EX4, because EX4 is pretty much a dead format at this point, just because I think there's, like, 1-2 competitive events in EX4?
Yeah. I think
so, like, EX4 is, like, whatever. But point is, that type of sentiment is what EX4 / BT12 meta is. You have, like, 5 decks that are gatekeeping. You have a small handful of decks that are able to top and compete with the gatekeeping, but that doesn't stop them from gatekeeping even more decks, and then we have less diversity, and because we have less diversity, there's less matchups that you have to be aware of, and then that's kind of what leads to a stale game faster. So some people will look at the data and say, oh, 11 decks being represented in top 16 for competitive BT12 EX4, that's pretty good. Comparatively to other formats, that is not good. I've said this and covered this multiple times in multiple different videos. I think I've even mentioned it here on previous episodes of the previous podcast incarnation. But having small number of decks that are competitively viable is not the most healthiest thing in the world. Yes, the amount of decks compared to some other games might still be pretty high, but in my perspective, I'm coming from formats where we had 20 decks able to top. Representation of the number one deck was 25 to 30%. We're not seeing that here. We're seeing, again, closer to blue hybrid numbers from BT7, where it's not that high, but the amount of decks is severely limited because of what is able to top and what the meta is centered and focused around.
Exactly. I think, I mean, you hit it right there. I essentially wholeheartedly agree with most of it because there will be outliers. There will be people that do well with Dorbic and things like this. There will be outliers, but for the most part, there is a reason why a meta will exist and will continue to exist. These decks will continuously show that they are better than the others, and people will cling to these decks that are better than the others because they want to perform better. That's the point in the meta, so it's kind of disingenuous to say anything otherwise.
And yeah, it's just so weird to see, read, and hear people kind of in disbelief that the meta isn't like they think that the meta is way healthier than it is, and they're actively promoting decks that really should not be actively promoted if somebody's actually trying to improve and be more competitive. So, not to like throw any shade out to anyone specifically, that's just something I've been casually reading on in the community, and as a person who literally crunches these numbers, compiles all of it together, there's a reason why I don't include small events. One, because most people don't record their small events, so they're all of that data is already inconclusive. And then the second thing on why I don't include small events in a lot of the data sets that I work with is because they don't matter. Like, the smaller the event, the worse of a data representation that it has. And it only works in Japan because there's a good volume of people actually reporting. And what they're reporting is just top decks. And they're not even reporting all of the top decks. So, like, there's still a lot of stuff in the Japanese data that is missing because somebody's not posting it for it to be recorded, because that's all up to the user or the store or however Japan works on collecting their data. And we are very much not the exact same as them, and both data collection and where our meta is. So, like, that's why I don't use small numbers. The smaller the number, the less it means and the less it matters. Most of the time, the events that I look at are 6+ events, usually around 80 plus, or not 6+ events, 6+ rounds at usually around 80. I would ideally like 100. Can't control that, plus people per event. And like, I kind of have this like average on what I think a healthy format is. I think like a good average format is the number one deck has about 30 to 35% representation, and then there's about around 15 plus playable decks in the meta that we're able to top. If a format can hit that type of a number spectrum, I would usually say that's your average format. Anything above that, in terms of like the lower the number in terms of the top decks representation, and the more decks that are able to top, the better I would think the format is. The higher the number in terms of the number one representation is, and the fewer decks are represented, the worse the meta is. That's just my perspective.
Yeah, I I mean, it's hard to say because these things are all they can be subjective, but when it comes from a data standpoint, you kind of can't be subjective to these things. I don't know. It's such a weird like fine line to be on because like you can easily say these decks can do XYZ, but unless we see it, can they really do XYZ? So it's like I don't know. It's such a weird conundrum to be in. Like, especially being on the side where it's like, oh, these decks, I can play any deck and do good if you're good at the game. I mean, yes and no. Like, so weird. I
Yeah,
don't know how to quite describe it.
the way I describe it is like, okay, you have Bagra rivals or like Bagra hunters. Would I recommend somebody trying to play competitively? Would I tell them play Bagra hunters? No. I would tell them play literally any other purple deck that's not Bagra hunters that actually is competitive. Like, why would I play Bagra hunters when I could play Beelzemon? Or better yet, why would I play Bagra hunters when I could play just normal hunters? And people would be like, "Oh yeah, but you could also play rival hunters." And I'm like, why are you entertaining that idea? Like, you could just play protagonist hunters because protagonist hunters is better than rival hunters. Like, supporting the idea of bad decks, I think it's fine from like a creative standpoint to like the game is cheap enough for the most part where it's like, yeah, I could build Bagra hunters and not financially ruin myself for having a for fun casual deck. But if I'm going to a big event and thinking competitively, that deck has zero data to support any of it. It's like, okay, somebody somewhere won a store championship with it. Give them a high five, a hand clap, a pat on the back. Does that mean that is going to translate into competitive success? Like actual competitive success? No, I do not think that.
No, no, I will never ever think that because that's just is not how it works. I don't understand where that sentiment is coming from because it just doesn't work that way. So I won't ever understand that. But I mean, I guess I can get that point where, like you say, the example of like bagger hunters when I could just play Beelzebub, which is 100% true. Like, why would I actively put myself in a worse position when I could just play the deck that's easier to get win with and not have to think as hard or do outplay my opponent as hard as I have to with bagger hunters. So it's like I guess maybe it's just our mindsets are different and we can't really these people just enjoy the thrill of being the underdog, which I mean I know someone like that, you know, Zach Mark Die. He's just like that, where he always plays the decks that are not as good and they wants to try and win like that. But if you are doing that, you have to be willing to understand that you are going to lose more often than not. You as long as you understand that you are playing something that is less than optimal, I'm good. You can say whatever you want about your deck. You can say that this is not as bad as it seems. I will have to agree to disagree, but it it's fine as long as you are understanding that you are actively choosing to make the game harder for you. So it's hard for me to look at a post that said something that people like complaining that they're not doing well when they're not playing decks that are doing well. It's hard to read those posts because then I'm just like I don't want to sound like an asshole or something that's mean, but like you're choosing to play decks that are just not good. So if you are doing that, how can you complain if that makes sense? Like how are you able to sit there and complain about something? And I'd be fine with the complaints if your complaint is that this archetype is undersupported XYZ and show information why that's relevant or not relevant. But like a lot of the posts just complain because people are playing competitive decks and they want to play and they want to do well with their tier 2 tier 3 deck. Well, you you can't really complain if you're playing those decks, like if that makes sense.
Especially with how tight and like how strict this format more specifically than most of the other formats have been. Like, I could tell people as of like last format, like BT11, like there was 24 playable decks that were able to make into top 16s throughout the competitive BT11 history. 24. Like, pick one of those 24 decks and you're good to go. Sure, one of them has like a couple of them have 1 or 2 or even 3 wins to them in top 16s. But like the fact that they were able to get there in large events and the fact that there was so many just showed the health of the format. This format, I think people honestly just don't know how strict and tight this format is, and the best decks are just that much better than literally everything else, and the meta that formed around those best decks. Like there's different levels of gatekeeping going on when it comes to trying to be able to break into top 16s in this format specifically. So I think there's just a general lack of unawareness there that some people just, they either don't care or they don't know exists. But
Interesting.
yeah, but transitioning into the actual topic on partially like this all feeds into one another, so it is loosely related, like the mechanics that Digimon plays with. So the mechanics that Digimon plays with, obviously some of these decks are leaning into mechanics that are a little bit on the strong side, sometimes unfair, sometimes unfun, and sometimes even game breaking or game warping. And I think Digimon, for the most part, has done a pretty decent job acknowledging when they screw up and where their screw ups are and trying not to prevent it. Not saying that happens all the time. BT14, Agumon, Free Evolution. But they generally try their hardest to not make the same mistake over and over again. We've seen this with Digizorption as a big example. Digizorption is a mechanic that reduces the cost of your Digivolution by you suspending one of your Digimon, your other Digimon down. Well, it's not even other. You could suspend the Digimon you're Digivolving into. You'd just be Digivolving suspended. But, point is, it is reducing the evolution cost. It is bypassing a fundamental thing set up into the game trying to cheat on tempo. That is incredibly powerful and incredibly broken. They had, early on, 2 level 5s that both had Digizorb 0. So that means Digizorb 3 with a Digivolution cost of 3, which means you Digivolve into them for free. So free level 5 to level 6 is just absolutely insanely strong. Being able to save as much tempo as that, especially in the earliest stages of the game, like in terms of development, because those were literally made in the first few sets, we saw every single other Digizorption card never reduce to 0 again from that point forward. They learned from their mistake. I think Digizorption can be an interesting mechanic to play around with. It's not going to be my favorite, which we'll get into later with some other subtopics, like what's our favorite mechanic and what we want to see, what we don't want to see, and so on. But like that's just an example on how a mechanic can help propel a deck forward and make it more competitively viable because it has that unfair mechanical advantage than some other decks. And Digimon has a slew of different mechanics. So we're not going to go over every single mechanic, but we're just going to be just bringing up the topic on like what mechanics we want to see revisited, what mechanics we don't like, and then what of those mechanics, like all of their mechanics, are our favorite, and like maybe if we have time, examine some mechanical pitfalls where, okay, this is where the mechanic is not good.
Okay.
So, if you want to lead the charge, what mechanic do you want to see revisited?
Well, I think if I had to pick a specific mechanic,
and these could be keywords, or they could just be a functionality of the deck, because like keywords, yes, they are a mechanic, but there are certain mechanics that are not exactly tied to a keyword.
I think I love the Digiburst mechanic as a whole, like as one of the keywords, just because I liked the idea, at least the earlier forms of it, of Digibursting and like the level 3 that would recycle when you Digibursted, put it back to hand. I like the alliance mechanic I hope that this isn't the only time that this comes, and I hope we get more of it because I think that mechanic can be really cool. Like if it's built more upon. Um, I really really dig the idea of the whole suspending one of my other Digimon. They buff each other up, get bonus attack or security bonus. Also bonus effects with like the green gate draw power, extra DP, all that other shenanigans that it has. I like it a lot, and I hope it does get more uh, support going forward, but in more archetypes, maybe. I don't know how they would be able to bring it into other archetypes since it seems to be only at the moment in green. Um, but I would like to see how they could intertwine it into other archetypes, like in red or something, or in blue, or maybe not blue because I think blue's got a little too much, but uh, maybe in like black or one of the other colors, essentially yellow.
I think
All those
yellow
other.
would be a good alliance color just because like yellow doesn't have a whole lot of mechanics, let alone mechanics that actually enhance their Digimon.
Yeah, they are pretty small in that ballpark because there's not a lot of DP bonus mechanics in that in yellow as a whole. And if they are, they're tied to your security, and a lot of them are pretty restricting. Um, so I guess yeah, I guess that would be a decent color to put it in. Hey man, give me yellow hybrid with that mechanic. That'd be super cool.
So, I am an aggro player, and one of my favorite mechanics is Blitz. I love the
Mm,
idea of Blitz. Just the ability to be able to essentially attack even when the turn is transitioning to the opponents was just always very appealing for me because like it felt bad when you digivolve into your Digimon past turn and do nothing. Blitz gives you like it solves that problem, and it does it where you could attack the opponent or like the opponent's Digimon depending on like the card because they had Blitz without Blitz and then they have the Blitz ability. So like I loved the idea of just being able to make my Digimon more useful in different ways than what the game would normally have allowed. Because like when Blitz first came out in BT5, that was like easily the craziest mechanic where it's just like, oh wait, I could attack, but the turn is still the memory's on the opponent's side. Like that's crazy. So I just wish that they could use Blitz again because it is a strong mechanic, not gonna lie. But
yeah, they would have to be quite careful with how they put it into certain things.
I
But I think
think
it's quite limiting on its own, to be fair.
yeah, but I think like where the game currently is, I think they could have Blitz and still have it be very like have it done very tastefully. Then another one of my favorite mechanics is evade. I think like protection is always a very risky thing, but I feel like evade the way it is, there is an inherent risk reward to it. I'm stopping you from getting rid of my Digimon, but
But
but it's at a specific cost at making my Digimon vulnerable to your Digimon. Or if you have a follow up option to be able to get rid of my card, then I'm vulnerable to that as well. On top of the fact that like it's not an all encompassing, you just cannot get rid of this card. Period. It has very specific strengths and very specific weaknesses. And we kind of see them try to do something similar with Barrier, which is going to be coming out in BT13, which I
Mhm.
like these defensive mechanics because we're at a point where removal is so high and prominent that we do need a way for the cards to be able to defend themselves, which is why I also kind of like Decoy. Uh, de-
Gallimon, please. Need,
yeah.
need defense, please.
So like I feel like a lot of the top decks have a very specific formula that they kind of follow. Do they have two sets of searchers? Does one of the searchers have an inheritable ability? Like if it's already ticking those check boxes, then your deck is already looking to be more competitive than others. Does it have a way to set up your tamer for free? That's also another checkbox where it's just like, okay, now we're cooking with the ability to set up at no additional cost. Then another one is like, does your level 6 have some insanely high levels of impact, or your level 5 has high levels of, like, there's subtle things that we see repeated within the top decks that make them the top decks. And I feel like if some of them have some more mechanical identities outside of like just whatever their archetype is like designed to do, just things to help flesh out decks, I think would be really, really nice, because there's a lot of mechanics that they like use a lot, and then you see a lot of mechanics that they barely use. And I don't know if that's like because they don't know how to do it tastefully, or they did it so bad that they just don't want to do it again, or if it was literally just, this is the flavor of this and it could be nowhere else outside of that. Like, there's a lot of reasonings for it, but they do have a lot of mechanics that they can still lean into and revisit.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some interesting ways. Like I'm very like retaliation is one of my favorite mechanics too. Was one of I love that mechanic a lot, and there's that, but it's also one of those mechanics where they have to be mindful of where they put it. So it's like there's plenty of other cool mechanics that could be more fleshed out and things like that. So I'd be interested to see how they would redo, or looking at like Blitz and things like that, how they could build upon that. Because I think like Blitz, for just because of this example I'm thinking of, it's like Blitz is quite strong. Like the ability to just say, I'm going to, no matter what, I get my attack out, get all my when attacking effects, do XYZ shenanigans if I want to, if my body can swing at bodies or clear whatever. It's quite a strong mechanic to do, since there's no other mechanic that allows you to do that unless you're very specific scenarios like Chaos Mon and things like that. But like other
Or
than that,
arrest your Digimon.
yeah, very specific cards that allow you to do so. But it's a very unique mechanic, and it tends to be only in red. I'm pretty sure at the current moment.
Yeah.
We only have it in red decks or red colored Digimon. Whether or not they do color like Ragna and things like that, etc., etc. But predominantly red Digimon have it. And it's also like blocked behind the when digivolving timing, so you can't just like use it whenever. So it's a very specific window, but that window is so good that they had to do those things where they have to make it specific, otherwise there'd be ways to abuse it. So I like the mechanic as a whole, and I would like to see how they can build upon it without making it absurd.
I mean,
Because
part of the balance, as we've seen with Gaiomon, is the fact that the base Digivolution cost is really high. So you get your attack off at the cost of giving up resources to your opponent more so than you normally would. So like in a lot of the Greymon decks, as an example, some people still run Gaiomon, some people cut the Gaiomon for the War Greymon inside of Black War Greymon. So it's just like, there's the argument where it's just like, do you want, like, the goal is to attack the opponent's Digimon and clear their body, but War Greymon does it more efficiently, but there's downsides to War Greymon because of his anti-synergy with some of the other cards in play, like with Black War Greymon and Black War Greymon X Antibody, where Gaiomon has a similar usage. You do need to set up his inheritables to do the same type of a thing, but he has reboot natively built in. He has naturally high DP, so it's not just a one and done type deal, and he naturally can digivolve on top of Black War Greymon, where War Greymon really can't do that. So like, there is pros and cons and advantages to it, and I think they do have to, like, with all of these mechanics, they do have to do them very tastefully, because if they don't do them tastefully, things could get out of hand quite easily, as we saw with the promo Grand Kawagamon. where it's just like, let me just Digiburst, throw my entire stack away, and just get Security Attack Plus. Like, that
Hence
was
why they started doing things where they're once per turn and adding more clauses to them.
even the Black War Greymon promo. Like, a lot of these early like Digiburst promos are still like actually strong cards, just because the free
No once per
repeated
turn, man.
uses on their abilities can still just be very insane.
That's what I was saying. Like them wising up and then making it not once per, or making it once per turn going forward is what I think eventually brought the downfall of Digiburst. Hence why we don't see it anymore, because it's just like the mechanics just don't end up being that good. Like there's very few outliers
I
to
mean,
that.
when they did do it tastefully with Harrismon and Rasenmon,
That card,
it sucked. Like,
that card is
so
bad. Like it's like
yeah.
that line is just not good. Which is what I mean, where like they do the thing to balance it, but because it's balanced like that, it's bad because you're wasting resources, inheritables that could just be good inheritables, to throw them away to get an effect. But in Rasenmon's case, you can only do it once, so it's just not as effective as clearing the board as, let's just say, Black War Gray, the promo, being able to digiburst two maybe of the rookies to then continuously swing over bodies or continuously swing at security, XYZ, do whatever they are trying to do.
I think
Um,
part of Rasenmon's problems was the added conditions needed in order to make the card as efficient as it possibly can. So you're already jumping through hoops for an already mundane level of effect.
yeah, and then his evolution condition was also pretty crappy. And you could manipulate it, but but you were more often than not hurting yourself to the point where you couldn't actually keep it at a decent cost if you wanted to do it early. So it's like you were either paying a massive amount to evolve into a mediocre Digimon, or you were paying a near nothing, and then you'd get an okay effect, but the effect wasn't enough to validate you paying the low cost and not doing essentially anything with it. Like I loved it because I played the deck a lot when it came out, and I tried it with like I mean I tried mixing with Yellow Hybrid. I tried doing a whole bunch of stuff with it, and it just wasn't very good. Like it required too many things, and your opponent has to play into it, and too many things have to go right. And when things like that have to happen, your deck tends to fall short.
And
Um,
I think they can design a happy middle ground. It's just, where is that middle ground and what meta is that for? Because like certain cards don't necessarily feel like they're designed for specific metas. So it's just like going into the BT7 environment. Rasenmon definitely felt like he was meant for more BT5, where it's like that's
yeah,
when the
slower
slower
gameplay.
gameplay, that's when the mechanic was more seen and more relevant. Like it and that was also, Yellow was missing the digiburst for the most part, so like it felt like that card was shelved and put somewhere else and slightly tweaked because they might have been afraid of something. Because like we've seen, like cards are designed, at least in my perspective, cards are designed in batches. So they'll have a giant pool of cards, and then they'll just divvy them out on what set they think is appropriate and attach the themes to them. So it's like they already knew, like what we're seeing with the Japanese spoilers for BT15. It's just like, okay, BT14 and BT15 were OG adventure sets. All of those cards were, I 100% guarantee you, designed at the same time. They were just figuring out, okay, we're going to put Ty in the first one, and then we're going to put Matt in the second one. Like, that's the type of decisions that I'm talking about here. And it feels like mechanically they also do this as well. So I'm pretty sure Rasenmon might have been designed in that batch of Digiburst designs, and then they just held onto the card because it might not have made sense to release it when they did, because
Yeah,
of the theme and mechanics of whatever set it was in.
I guess that makes sense because I guess they wanted to push the Lord Nightmon, and that was the main yellow archetype for that set. But I mean, man, dude, it felt real bad trying to make that deck work. It did not feel good playing Rasenmon. It was more like I was just playing Yellow Hybrid and he just happened to be in the deck.
I almost wonder what would have happened in BT5 if we did get Rasenmon instead of Lord Nightmon.
I I wonder if it would have been good.
And then we could have gotten his Fury mode whenever we wanted. It didn't matter, but the fact that like there's a lot of like what ifs, but mechanically putting the cards in order, it would have been definitely interesting to see what would have came from that. But that just goes to show that mechanics are very, very important. And it's not like they can't revisit mechanics because they have. We've seen Digiburst again subtly, time and time, throughout Digimon's history. Digiburst has came and gone. Decoys came and gone. And they constantly are making new mechanics based on whatever the theme that the Digimon they're designed to play with is trying to do. So it's just when and where is the question, or if they are too afraid. Like this might be like another podcast episode, but like I almost want to do like a Digiburst, or not Digiburst, Digimon Mechanical Storm Scale. So if anyone's unfamiliar with Magic the Gathering, they have a whole bunch of mechanics because that game's been around for quite a long time, and they have something called the Storm Scale, where they ranked and rated the strength of the mechanic and how likely we would be able to see that mechanic again based on that strength and the flavor of the mechanic. So I think maybe that might be like a fun thought experiment. I might do that as a separate video. But regardless, I think maybe they might be designing under that same philosophy where they have like a pseudo storm scale for Digimon. But speaking of some of the mechanics, like the more powerful mechanics, what mechanics do you think that they should just drop or like never use again? Because
that's easy for me. That's very easy.
What is it?
Digizorb. I don't want to see any of that. I never want to see that mechanic. That mechanic is too easy to mess up. It's too easy to get wrong. And then it'll end up being either one, they'll be the exact same thing where they'll make them -2 and then they'll be 1 cost, which then makes them the exact same as the other Digimon. So what's the point in using anything newer when you could just use the old ones that do the exact same thing for the same cost, unless their effects or inheritables are different. But usually with Digizorbs, they don't really give them good inheritables because they cost so little to evolve. And I think it's a hard mechanic to balance, like without just making it outright boring. So it's like, I think they could easily just get rid of that mechanic. Hence why we haven't seen that many in a while. I mean, what are we seeing? I mean, we will see coming forward, aren't we? In BT, not 13. Yeah, 13. With the...
Are they bringing Digisorption back in BT13? Like, I know we're getting
Lilamon,
more planned.
I think that line does have Digizorb, the level 5. Let me make sure before I lie to everybody here. BT13. It's not Lilamon. What is it? BT13 green. Let's see what's in BT13. Was it BT13? Oh, I think it's the next set coming forward.
I don't see we're getting Digizorb in BT13.
No, there's okay, not the Lilamon. I thought the Lilamon did that. Does she do?
No, the Sunflowermon doesn't. Nothing in BT13 green does.
There's a level 5 going forward. I don't remember what set that comes out in, but it's not this set. It's in either the next set or some whatever promo. I don't remember, but I know there's another level 5 that comes out, the Digizorbs that they. But this deck uses also the Digizorb mechanic as well, just to basically uses all the Bloom Lord stuff to cheat up the line and normal green shenanigans, basically. But I just don't think the mechanic is very good. Like, I think it was a very poorly thought out mechanic, and it essentially cripples all the cards that are Digizorb because they have to be either gutted in terms of whatever effects they have, or they just don't have any effects and they're just vanilla evos that cost less, which is just boring from a design perspective. I think that's just not fun to play with. Like, yeah, I can Digizorb, and yeah, it's fun when I get to my level 6, but then, like, I don't care about anything that happened in between getting from level 3 to level 6,
Yeah,
which I
as
think
long as
is
the level 6 is super impactful, nothing else really mattered, which is why, like, we've seen the nerfing of HPD really cripple green for a lot of sets to come is because they didn't balance that properly.
and I mean that's another perfect example of like it's essentially that card is essentially Digizorb, um,
In
in
option
the
form.
form of an option, and now they literally can't make good level 6s or level. They have to be they have to be very careful with what level 6s they make because of that card, and it's still existing. Hence why all these cards are 5 cost and above. Like going forward, you will see a lot of level 6s in green have be 4, 5, 6 costs to evolve because of all the shenanigans they skip going forward because of Digizorb and things like that. If those mechanics did not exist and they had normal evolution mechanics, just like the other decks, you would see the cost dramatically less for these cards. And then it will always be this way until they either one say bye bye to hidden potential, and then we never worry about that, and then gut either kill all the Digisorption cards or redo them and make them have more costs involved in them.
I don't think that they just straight up gut them. That's not Bandai style. And
No, they will never.
they wouldn't redo them either. They would just let them be and see if they're actually a problem or not, which is what we've seen in some of the more recent stuff, like them literally hitting cards that didn't really seem like they should be hit based on the direction of the meta, but they were just like, yeah, it's just limiting design space. We have to get rid of it.
And that's like, but like, if we can even look at it, like from every, like all the meta green decks use those Digisorption cards, all of them. Like the only outlier you could say is Grandis, but that's like its own thing. And honestly, it doesn't even play like a green deck. To be fair,
No, it
like
plays more like a red deck where
I'm
like
like, you just find all your pieces and Unga Boonga, kill them. That's really all that deck does. So it's like you can't even really call that a green deck because it doesn't follow the same green philosophies that every other green deck does.
yeah, and
So
there's a lot of things that like already have built in cheating on tempo and cheating on memory. So like adding Digizorb on top of you already cheating on as much tempo and memory as you can just already sounds like a really dumb mistake, which is why like when a Bloomlord player sees hidden potential discovered, they will
they will
literally
auto
digivolve for free into their level 6, gain memory, and like do even more crazy shenanigans that they normally would not be able to do otherwise. So like I kind of agree with Digisorption being a really poorly thought out mechanic. I think like at the beginning of the game, it was definitely more interesting for them to think about trying to do just because they were still trying to figure out the actual core of the game. Like they have the base of the game, they don't have the core of the game. And now I think that we have a better understanding on what the core fundamentals of the game are and what makes cards good and what makes cards bad better. Yeah, that Digizorb does look like a really dumb decision. As far as my pick, this is going to be a really, really hot pick as far as like a mechanic I want to never see again, period.
interesting.
It's recovery. I hate
Hmm.
recovery.
Interesting.
It's not because I am an aggro player and having the opponent heal out of the damage that I've dealt and then excessively heal. It's very like one that just play style is very annoying for a lot of people. It's more of the fact that recovery is broken because of security. So like the threats that you could put into security is part of the reason why I do not like recovery as a mechanics. Because now we see with like Ofani Loop, they have ways to be able to rig their security because of the unforeseen synergies between cards and how good the recovery mechanic is. I think like they can do recovery good, and we've seen them restrict and limit how you're able to recover. But I still think just recovery as a whole is still insanely strong of a mechanic.
You don't like hitting into my back-to-back holy waves?
No, I don't.
I think that's super fun. No, I'm joking. I kind of agree. I mean, I think that them not putting like Jay Stewart says in the chat, actually, funnily enough, um, them not doing like a hard cap to how much you can get, I think is what makes it not necessarily infuriating, but it's just not fun to play against. Like when you're playing these aggro decks, you take out 3 or 4 of their security, and then in one turn they heal back 2 to 3, and then you're back to square one. And while they're simultaneously getting rid of your bodies, setting up their security with like being able to look at it with like what the heck's the tamer, the oh my goodness, the memory setter, oh god, TK, um, playing TK and looking at your security, guarantee knowing what you have so you can set up and play around it. That mechanic as a whole is just not fun to play against, and I completely understand not enjoying it, to not enjoying playing against it. I will say, as somebody who played a lot of Yellow Hybrid and things like that, I I enjoyed playing that, like that aspect of being able to be like, okay, I see what's in my security. I can kind of play around it. I know I either have to turn the gas up if my security's dog water, or if I have to, I can kind of chill and play my own pace because I know my security's good. That's kind of fun as the player, but as the person playing against it, I can completely see how that would be just not fun. And especially in yellow, where yellow has some of the best removal in the game, where there's just nothing you can do about some of the removal.
Yeah, DP
And
reduction, the fact that it's the game state itself saying this Digimon can no longer exist already makes it the best form of removal, on top of the fact that, oh, just shoving your Digimon into security, like having ways to bypass some of like the more known protections is fine, but like that's just a really strong form of removal.
it is definitely one of those like things that it just sucks when swing security and then you hit chaos degrade or something absurd like that, or Lonke, and there's just nothing you can do about it. It feels awful. Like I can completely understand getting to that point, and you're in a long game. And I will say, like, most of those decks that are like focused on recovery, their game plan isn't to kill you, not to win like every other deck. Their game plan is just to stall you out and then deck you out, and that's not fun to play against, especially in a competitive environment. I understand that that is a win condition. Yes, it is a win condition. It's not a very fun win condition, and I don't enjoy playing against security control X, these stalled decks where their sole purpose is just to prevent you from winning, but not actually winning themselves, which I think that's counterintuitive, but that's how people found ways to win. They found an alternative way to win the game. I can't necessarily fault them for that because it is a way to win. It's also not the hardest way to win, um, which sucks because I think that really sucks when they win game one and then they just stall, go to time, and then you lose because they went to time and they got the draw. It is one of the worst feelings ever when you're in tournament, and it just sucks. But there's really no way to counteract that. And once you've gotten a bit better at the game, you can learn how to play against security control, and you know how to play against it, and it's not so bad. It's just not fun. Like I can play against it and win more often than not, but I'm not enjoying my time doing it. Is essentially what it boils down to. And when I'm playing a game, at the end of the day, I want to enjoy the game I'm playing, even if I'm at a competitive level and things like that. I still want to have fun when I'm playing this game. And the recovery mechanic as a whole, when you get to those other levels like that, like the toxic levels like that, it's just not fun to play against.
Like some good casual ones and like security manipulation, I think is like fine. It's just they have some tendencies to go a little bit overboard. And as we've seen, like the more unrestricted the recovery is, especially at the lower cost, the
That's
the
healthy.
the better, yeah, the better the card is and the more annoying things become. And like, I'm fine with security tech plus, like, sure, take away my ability to deal damage. At least you're not messing with your security, making it insurmountably harder to be able to fight through, because like, I could just, it feels more high rolly because I could hit a security bomb, I could not. You could know what's in there, or you could not. Like, Beelstar basically feels like it's trying to be security control. It just doesn't have the recovery mechanic. And I like Beelstar as a deck because it forces you to try to actually, win the game versus stall the opponent out and hope your security does all of the work for you. That's partially like, but all of the other points you kind of nailed on right on the head in terms of like how I feel. It's just not fun, wastes a lot of time, and like at the end of the day, like it's just literally unhealthy as a mechanic. And not saying that they can't do it, it's that they need to be very smart on how, why, when, and who does recovery.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's one of those mechanics where it can definitely teeter too far in one direction very easily.
But yeah, so as far as like, what do you think out of all of the mechanics that we currently have, what do you think is your current favorite?
Ooh, my current favorite? Dang, that's pretty hard. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've been playing a lot of Wolf Force recently. I really enjoy the evade mechanic. I like, I just enjoy how it reacts, like how it interacts with a lot of different decks, and some of them just completely bypass it, like Digivolve and Bounce and all that other stuff. But like some decks, like when you're going against like Beelzemon and that, or Bellstarmon, for example. I remember I played against two Beelzemon during my run in Ultimate Cup, and it was like wow, like they could not do anything to my whole force stack when it came out. I would just get into All Force X, and then it was near impossible for them to get rid of the All Force X if I had an arena or two out on the board. So it was like I love the way that it interacts with both the Digimon that it is part of. Like Examon is super fun to play. I also like the way All Force plays. It's just that that mechanic of being able to be, I can be defensive with this, or I can be aggro where I want to swing. Did I hit something I die to? Okay, evade and trigger whatever effect to try and unsuspend and keep going. So it gives you a way out of scenarios that you would just lose it from normal scenarios. And I think that's one of the coolest mechanics because it's not broken, because there are plenty of ways to get around it. Plenty of ways. I mean, All Force literally loses to itself. Like, it literally loses to All Force. It loses to anything that can digivolve it, um, anything that can just swing past it multiple times, um, outpace it. So it's like there are plenty of mechanics that just outright beat it, but it's not a mechanic that's bad, which I like a lot. Like you can rely on it, and it could also be like your worst like thing ever because sometimes it just doesn't matter, which is super cool. It would be either that or I guess Blitz, because I just love Blitz. I love red decks, so like I play a lot of Gallantmon, so Blitz is pretty cool. I like being able to swing at my opponent even when it's their turn, or technically the end of my turn. For getting into specifics.
So, I kind of am in a similar mindset. Instead of evade, one of my favorite mechanics is actually armor purge. Again, I am a dirty, filthy aggro player, and armor purge just kind of feels like it's doing everything evade is doing, but taking a more aggressive spin on it. It gives me protection on my Digimon. If they were to die, instead of keeping that Digimon, it basically de-digivolves, which comes with its own set of unique interactions, pros and cons, and like I still am able to be aggressive with my Digimon and not necessarily worry that the opponent would have the exact out. There are still ways to obviously out armor purge, DP reduction, bouncing, so on and so forth. Like, it's just only against specifically deletion. And if they could still delete my Digimon multiple times, that's fine. But like that's the same type of camp that Evade is in, where it's like if they have multiple removal effects to get rid of the Digimon, all right, I'm gone no matter what. So like,
yeah, I was gonna lose no matter what, so it makes no difference.
yeah, like it has its own set. Like it's like Evade for me, but it has its own sets of strengths, and they've proven that they can put armor purge on not armor Digimon specifically. So like we can get some really interesting armor purge based Digimon later in the game as well, so it's not specifically tied hardcore married to armor based Digimon. Which is one thing I kind of like, is just the fact that they can take something that was literally meant for armor Digimon and be able to apply it in various other Digimon as well. So I've been playing a lot of Blue Flares, and the fact that the alternative level 5s that's not Metal Greymon, like Metal Greymon, Cyber Launcher, and Decker, they have armor purge, and they're not armor Digimon. So I kind of just liked the flavor behind it, and it allows the deck to have some extra tools in its toolbox to be able to protect itself, which I think is like super important for a lot of decks to have, is the ability to both be offensive and defensive and be able to protect itself. One of my other favorite mechanics is Raid. I feel like Raid to me is kind of a trap in my own head, because I want to be aggressive, but I also want to kill the opponent's Digimon. So Raid kind of lets me try to do both, even though like you kind of need piercing to pair up with it to like get full value. The idea of Raid allows me to deal with problems that I might not be able to deal with conventional removal. So it's just, again, more tools into the toolbox to be able to react and respond, because Digimon isn't the most reactive of games. We are getting reactive mechanics with like cards being able to trigger in the hand with Blast Digivolution, but those have very specific windows, and I feel like just having a whole bunch of different ways to be able to respond to the opponent is just really, really good, and Raid kind of does that for me, where it's like if I need to be aggressive, I could ignore it, and if I need to be defensive and try to kill the opponent's stuff, I have it there as well.
I mean, I love the Raid mechanic. I mean, especially paired up with like Blitz, with like Gallantmon and all that. I play a lot of Gallantmon, so that mechanic is super cool. Like, it's just a good mechanic overall, and it's not broken. I think it's just very solid overall, because it's just there are weaknesses where it has to target the highest DP Digimon unsuspended. So you can't just willy-nilly, if they swing with their big guy and then they leave a little guy, you can't raid into their guy.
Right. It creates interesting. Yeah, it creates interesting dynamics and board states, just because you have to acknowledge that Raid is a mechanic that they could be playing around with. And I don't necessarily think like anything currently should be restricted hardcore as of right now, in terms of like seeing where the direction of the game goes, because like a lot of these mechanics are still just kind of starting. Like Alliance has one deck, Raid has like literally 3 cards. So like there's a lot of mechanics that are still kind of new that they're exploring, and like I'd like to see where they go before anything gets like hardcore hit.
Yeah, we need a little more time for them to get their feet wet before we can really be like, oh, these are way too good, hit them now, or XYZ, whatever. So I think we're Digimon right now, at least in terms of balance and things like that, are fine. I don't think we need anything hit at the current moment.
I agree. Like there are definitely obviously things to look out for, because a lot of these mechanics can have some very easy pitfalls. I think one of the easiest pitfalls that Digimon loves to find and dig itself into is free value. They, for whatever reason, love reducing evolution. Like, they love making things free, and I kind of hate that. Like, I
I
get
go
it.
so hard.
I get it, but I don't get it at the same time. Like, I've played some of Bandai's other games, like Dragon Ball Super, where it's just like, this card says it costs 8. Does it actually cost 8? No, it actually costs nothing. Why does this 8 cost nothing? That part absolutely blows my mind, and it's beyond me on how they can have a mechanical identity when it comes to the resource system and then ignore it. And like, that's right now one of Digimon's biggest pitfalls mechanically is they love to cheat on their own tempo, so much so that it can sometimes be a huge detriment to the game. Like, that's, as we saw with Digisorption, it it just was too good. It was too damaging for Green's identity as a whole, and it cannibalized everything Green was attempting to do, and it really harmed the color as a whole. And I get that Digimon is moving away from more color-based identities and going for more name-based identities, which I think is another design pitfall, where it's just like, okay, what is the point of colors if everything is just by name at this point anyway? It's like, there, it's to try to make things cheaper, but like, you're obviously gonna, like, there's no reason to not make things cheaper by using the correct name, because that's what you're laying out for us. Like, there's just some small mechanical pitfalls like that where it's just beyond stupid and beyond me on why they would want to do it. Like, I get it, Garurumon digivolving into Were-Garurumon, yes, that is the proper evolutionary line. I get that. But now the fact that I'm transcending colors now ignores the point of the color, and now you're just picking cards with abilities based on their name. So, like, it takes a lot of deck building fun out of it, because decks are, like, slowly being built for you as a result because of this.
Yeah, I think I mean I kind of agree there where we them going for the naming convention rather than just what was always done, color, and making archetypal things based on their colors and things like that, is kind of overall hurting the game, because it's gonna bring it to a point where it doesn't matter what color your deck is, so basically you can bleed into just about anything, and that sounds like it would be great from a card game player's perspective. Oh, I can mix and match these colors and do different things. I can mix black with the red stuff, and then now there's other Greymons that are in multicolors that I can bring into this deck now, since it specifically asks for Greymon or Metal Greymon or whatever XYZ card. But like, now, because of that, it essentially bastardizes the color system. Like, there's literally no reason to care about colors when these cards all bleed into each other. Like, it makes no sense that we follow a color convention, period. Why do they have colors if they can just bleed into each other? Um, the dual color thing, I think, to me was fine, and that was an okay. It was a little much for some decks, but it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, it's not too bad, and you still had to follow certain color conventions, and you couldn't just do whatever. But like, cards with the names on them and the alternate evolution condition just brings a weird dynamic that I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of, but I I guess I can see why they want to do it. I just don't see why it would be a good thing overall.
Yeah, that's like one of my biggest issues as well. I mean, that's why I brought it up as like one of the biggest design pitfalls, is like, you are printing the fact that this card should cost 4 to evolve, but you're balancing the card based on the fact that its real cost is 3 to evolve, because you're using it in combination with the designed lines. And like, then why have the initial evolution cost, especially if the rest of the effect isn't going to work if you're not even using it with the design lines to begin with. So like it's it almost feels like they're doing it just as a formality. Like, okay, sure, in let's just take Shine Greymon as an example. You could use Armadillomon, you could use Hawkmon, you could use Biomon. In BT13, you could use Kudamon, all as like generic searchers, but you're like slowing your deck down for no real extra benefit when you already have inline searchers that you could be playing. Like, yes, you could make the argument of what it's digging and searching for, and the fact that you still can evolve into it even though it is less efficient is very nice. It's just there's not that much extra benefit to do so, which is like the like cool and sad part about it, because we see already in effect, like, if we didn't have the name-based evolution, then it would encourage players to be a little bit more creative with the tools that we're trying to be working and playing with.
Yeah, because it literally makes no sense, because like in Shine Greymon's example, like why would I use any other level 4 that isn't like a Geo Greymon? And just for like inheritable, like why would I do that? That would dramatically make my cards way more expensive to go into, which then makes my turns worse, because then I have to pass turn almost every time whenever I evolve, and then that gives my opponent more chances to come back and or even further put me behind. And it's just like, I understand that the point was to just make it so the intention was to use it with the line, but you have the flexibility to use it with other things. But that flexibility is hindered by the cost. Like, how is it really flexible if it costs 4 when the intended like gameplay mechanic is have 3 memory, evolve for 3, then go into whatever XYZ boss or go further? So it's like, and in Shine Greymon's case, it's a little iffy because you could supplement the cost with Marcus and things like that. But like, that's not the point. Like, that's not what I'm saying. If you take Marcus out completely, you're literally hurting yourself by just using anything that isn't Geo Gray, Dinosaur Agumons, that kind of scenarios. So it's like, is it really flexible that you can mix these cards? Not really. I mean, you're literally hurting yourself doing that.
Yeah, can and should are two completely different things. I can do that, but should you do that? Like, it's a very interesting pitfall that they could very easily fall into, and they really like being in that hole for whatever reason. Just like they still, like, when a mechanic first comes out, they always try to find a good balance when it comes to a lot of these mechanics, which is why sometimes like they get scrapped faster than others, is because they might get scared or something. Like a good easy example is like decoy. Decoy could be very powerful of a mechanic because it's another protection based ability. The cost of it is your Digimon, but obviously having decoy on a high level body that you're paying a lot for, working really hard to get into, just doesn't seem worth it. And like the easier way to use decoy is on the lowest level body, so that way you're putting the least amount of effort into setting that card up to be able to protect your other Digimon you're trying to protect. Like each mechanic has its own sets of like, this is kind of where and how and why it should be used. And like, it's just really interesting to like stop and think about how they've applied it, where they are applying it currently that's being played, and so on and so forth, and like how they're treating these types of mechanics.
Ooh, very. It is very interesting to see. So I hope to see more with some of these mechanics, and I hope they do, like for example decoy. I would like to see more tasteful ways to do it that aren't boring, like sticking it on a level 5 Mamemon. Like, Like as if anyone's going to use that card that's not in a Mamemon deck. So it's like it's. I would like to see more ways they can do it. It's just that mechanic can be very, very unfair very easily.
I mean,
Um,
that's a lot of the mechanics when they're done poorly, or like, so that just goes into like the fine line where they'll just create like really bad cards just to probably test the mechanic out, see where things fall, how people are utilizing it, and then maybe bring it back and try to do it better the next time around, or they just will completely scrap it. So I'm not Bandai. I don't know how they're designing cards. Most likely they're just outsourcing it and they're just telling them, here's the flavor to incorporate inside of it. I could be wrong on that entirely. But I think Digimon is one of the most mechanically rich games that marries a lot of its lore to the mechanics. So, like, one of, like, before we start wrapping things up, I think, like, as an example, we could see Cross come back, or like a Hunter's style of deck come back based on what lore that they could adapt to fit that, like with how Applimon works. So, like, even though I know a lot of people might not like Applimon, that seems like if they wanted to use Cross and they wanted to use the Hunter style of mechanics, then that would be a really good way to be able to incorporate that. Same thing with DNA. You can make the argument that, oh, it's just multiple different DNAs, and you're just DNAing to DNA all the way up the chain into your higher stages instead of just a normal traditional evolution. But that's the interesting part on how they could take the lore and apply the mechanics that we have or create new mechanics to make that lore work.
I think I do believe that is the case. I think we have such a interesting uh, fusion of that. Like, our I guess it would be like your the way that they do incorporate lore into all the so basically all the cards. Like back in the day with like Shoutmon DX in BT5, how you had to like evolve them on top of each other in order to get the effects and heritables, and the more they had, the more effects they would do. Like they do such a good job of doing that, and I mean, like for example, this in this set, Alliance. I think Alliance is a very cool mechanic, and it functions well where the lower Digimon are, gathering together to become a stronger or pull all their power into a stronger Digimon, and then that stronger Digimon is now able to do more with that. I think that's super cool, and things like that will continue to happen. Hence, when we go into like BT13, we get the Royal Knights and all that other stuff. No evolutions in that deck completely. Like, there's so many interesting mechanics and things that we see going forward that are super super cool. That will be fun to play. And I'm excited to see what new stuff that we see. Hence, with the leaks and all that other stuff. I mean, one of my favorite lines is eventually coming up, and you already know what it is, but I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what they do with that line, and I hope they do something incredible with it. But um, we're in an interesting spot, and I think the game is going to be continue to be cool and make cool decisions, assuming they don't mess up those decisions. We should be seeing some cool stuff down the line.
Yeah, and they seem to only be banning or limiting things when they are acknowledging a mistake and things are getting a little too out of hand, which I think is fair and appropriate. But I definitely am excited mechanically to see what Digimon has in store, because this is what, going into the third year of Digimon, and there's still a lot for them that they could adapt and a lot of different directions that they can go, not to mention any revisits to some mechanics or even some decks that we might not even be expecting. So it's just looking to be a good time all around. I'm really looking forward to move past the BT12 EX4 format. I think it's kind of an awkward format and not really super great, but that's just me personally. I know others could be having fun with it, but the future always seems more exciting than the present because that's just what's coming up. So, on that note, I think we will be wrapping it up here. I want to thank everyone again for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to try to support the podcast by sharing it with others on various social medias. Make sure to leave a like, follow, subscribe, whatever based on the platform of your choice and your listening preference, on top of rating and reviewing it. And I want to thank everyone again for listening, and we will see you again next time.